All right, Chevra on Zoom, we still good? Excellent. Great to see everyone. Welcome to Nazir. Hashem. All right, I'll say good morning. Shechianu, Vikimanu, Vigyanu Lazman Hazeh. What an incredibly exciting time. To Me'er Hashem begin a new Masechta, Mamish, new month, new Masechta, new beginnings. Absolutely incredible. Let's say, so again, we begin by thanking all of our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Shvat, to thank Mrs. Bracha Strimber for dedicating the Shiur and Midrashos this month in memory of her husband, Avram ben Kalman Eliezer Halevi Zichron Bracha. To thank Ayala and Sarah Steinberg for dedicating all the Shiur and Midrashos this month in the Schos of Refuah Shlema for Shulamis Bas Susha. And I will say to thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, the Ehrenfeld Mishpacha, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Yona's and David's great-grandfather, Moshe Avram ben David Zichron Livracha, and to thank David and Malki Kramer for dedicating the shir today in honor of the entire Daf Yomi shir and in celebration of the completion of Maseches Nedarim and in Me'er Hashem, the beginning of Maseches Nazir. Incredible. Well, say with that, let us begin. Here we go. Daf Beis Amud Aleph. We'll say also if you want your Nedarim, your Nazir notebooks, they are here, right? Your Nazir notebook, Rabbi Shmuel, you can take a few. Thank you. Share your Nazir notebooks, Me'er Hashem, get them all. Supplies last. We'll say, like I say every Masechta, we'll say it is so kedai to have the notebook, because even if you don't have to take this notebook, have a notebook. I'll say because again, even to record one thought, one idea, one halacha on every daf gives you something to retain. We know the speed at which we go, it's hard. It's just hard to remember day to day what it is that we're doing. You record a little something on each day, machshava, that's yours. That's yours throughout the Masechta. Good about say, let's go. Says the Mishnah, Daf Beis Amud Aleph. Second. Okay. Daf Beis Amud Aleph. Says the Mishnah. Sorry. Okay. Says the Mishnah. Kol kinui nezirus kinezirus. So we'll say again, what's very exciting about this particular Mishnah as well. So we're going to see the incredible amount of overlap. Oh, thank you. We're going to see the incredible amount of overlap between our Masechta of Nidarim and Nazirus. And in fact, again, what's very exciting about this is so many of the concepts that we've already learned in Nidarim are going to come out in Nazirus because, of course, a Nazirus is a neder, right? A neder Nazirus. So here we go. First Mishnah. Kal kinui nezirus kinezirus. It's like being back home. Right? So also remember again, kinui from the beginning of Masechas Nedarim. So a kinui, remember, is an equivalent term. We're going to deal, just coming attractions. We're going to be dealing with both kinuyim and yados in this Mishnah. A kinui, remember again, is an equivalent term. A yad is a partial term. So here we go. So kol kinui nezirus kinezirus. Any kinui in nezirus is like a formal declaration itself. Take a look at the top Rashi, and Baruch Hashem, we want to wish a Baruch Haba to Rashi. Rashi is back in our lives now, Baruch Hashem, front and center, or whatever, front and right? So Rashi says over here, Kol kinuye nezirus kinezirus. Rashi says, Kol makabel alav nezirus, ba'os salashon shebadul chachamim, harehu nazir. Any person who accepts a neder nezirus upon himself in one of the approved terms used by Chazal, ultimate works. And I will point out, do you remember again, back in Nidarim, there's a machlokes about kinui, right? What is a kinui? Is a kinui just some type of contrived lashon by Chazal, right? That Chazal made up a kinui, right? Or ultimately, again, is kinui lashon umos ha'olam? Or is it ultimately, again, foreign language? So again, Rashi points out that machlokes as well. The point over here, look at Rashi. Anyone who accepts upon himself a Nazirite vow, using one of the equivalent terms that Chazal coined, Harehu Nazir. This person is Nazir. For example, Kimo im Amra Hareini Nazir, ve'eluhein kinuei Nazirus, Naziak Paziach, Nazik Naziach Paziach, Misham Harini Nazik, Osham Harini Naziach, O Paziach Harehu Nazir. So we'll say we're going to see some examples of this. So remember again, anyone who uses any one of these, we'll call it approved equivalent terms. Now, both say, do these equivalent terms, were they coined by Chazal, Are they foreign language equivalents? So that's a machlokas we already saw in the Darim, and Rashi quotes this over here. So back to the Mishnah. So kol kinui naziros kinaziros. That's fact number one in the Mishnah. Anytime. So again, we'll say, what's the typical way to become a Nazir? Typical way to become a Nazir? Hareini Nazir. That's it. That's it. 2 words change your life. Hareini Nazir. A kinui means I use an equivalent term, which we're going to see in just a little bit. So now we'll say the Mishnah switches gears and goes from kinui to yados. Homer, ehei, a person who says I will be. Now we'll say, remember again, what are yados? What's a yad? A yad is a partial declaration. Now remember again, if you were making the full declaration, what would you say? What would you say? Ehei, Nazir. In this case, the guy is saying, I will be. Homer hare, ehei, I will be. Hare ze Nazir. Right? That becomes a Nazir. Oh, ehei no'eh. Or I want to be handsome. Or I want to be beautiful. Nazir. Ultimately, such a person becomes a Nazir. Now, we're going to have to qualify that a little bit because this certainly sounds like some pretty open-ended statements over here. And they will clarify that, but these are examples of yados. These are examples of yados. If you look at Rashi, so Rashi says over here, Ha'omer ehei, afa pi shelo hotzi b'svasav Nazir. So they both say, the full declaration would be ehei Nazir. Right? I will be a Nazir. Here it's a yad, it's a partial declaration. So a person is just saying, hey, I will be. So a person who makes that partial declaration, ultimately, again, he is a Nazir. Rashi says, Hare is a Nazir. The yodos naziros kinaziros. Because a partial declaration, ultimately, again, of naziros is naziros. Fine. Next, I will say, so now we go back to kinuyim. So what are the kinuyim? What are the proper kinuyim? Naziach, naziach, paziach, harez and nazir. So we'll say, so ultimately, again, these are examples of, these are kinuyim, equivalent terms. A person says, I will be a nazik, I will be a naziach, I will be a paziach. Ultimately, again, these are kinuyim, equivalent terms, and a person is a nazir. Harini kazeh, remember, I'll say, listen to this. Let's say I say, I want to be like that guy, right? Or like this guy, right? Or harini misalsel, or I will be misalsel, we'll define these terms. Or harini mechalkel, or I will be mechalkel. Hare alai l'shaleach pera, I'm going to grow out my hair. Shabbos saying all of these terms, hare ze nazir. All of these terms to go ahead and work to affect naziris as well. Hare alai tziporim. What if I say I hereby take upon myself birds, right? Birds. Shabbos say we're going to see part of the nazir's vow is to, well, I should say, part of his concluding karbanos are bird offerings. So we'll say, what if I say, I hereby take upon myself to bring birds? What's the what is that? Meir says Nazir. Meir says you are a Nazir. V'cham say Eino Nazir. You're not a Nazir. Good. So we'll say, see, here's what we've got in our Mishnah, right? For our purposes for today, here's the takeaway. Number one, kinuyim work. Equivalent terms work to affect Naziros. What are examples of? So let's actually start at the top. How do you become a Nazir? How do you become a Nazir? Typically to become a Nazir, Hareini Nazir. Kinuyim also work. Nazik, naziach, paziach. You go and you make any one of those terms. Ultimately, again, you become a Nazir. Nazir. What else works? Yados. Partial declarations. Ehei, I will be. Ehei no'eh, I'll be beautiful. That ultimately, again, creates Naziros as well. Beautiful. We'll say we'll come back to the rest. Says the Gemara. Mechti. Shabbos say first order of business is, what is this doing here? What is this doing here? So watch this. So Mechti. Seder Nashim Kai. They will say, now understand, where are we? Where are we in Shas? Where are we in Shas? We're in Seder Nashim. We're in Seder Nashim. So why is Meseches Nazir here in Seder Nashim? So the first order of business is a placement issue. Why is this here in Seder Nedarim? Sorry, Seder Nashim. So the Gemara says, Michti Tana Seder Nashim Kai, my time at Tani Nazir. Why is Nazir here? Right, say, if you think about it, so Nazir has absolutely nothing to do with Nashim. So why is it here? So watch this. To which the Gemara says, Tana akra koi. So we'll say, the Tana himself is focused on the pasuk. What's the pasuk? V'haya elam simsachin be'enav, ki matza ba ervas davar. Pasuk says, if a wife will not find favor in her husband's eyes, why not? Because he has found some matter of immorality in her. Now, both say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Tanakra kai. Now, watch this. So Rashi says, "Ubedinhu tahavile lemisne lebasar sota." Now, both say, we're going to see the real placement of Nazir. The real placement of Nazir really comes after sota. We'll see that in just a moment. That's really where it belongs. Now watch this. Ela aidi de tana ksuvas. So remember again, let's work backwards a little bit. Let's work backwards. Where ultimately, again, where does, right, we start with Maseches Ksuvas. And I will say Ksuvas obviously belongs in Seder Nashim. Why? Because Lamaisa, it's about marriage. It's about Ksuva, right? Also, Ksuvas has everything in it. So watch this. So we start with Ksuvas. Ela aidi de tana ksuvas, the ikar Seder Nashim. Ksuvas itself is the foundation of Seder Nashim. Now watch this. Well, it's incredible. The Tana Bay Parak Hamadir. Now in Ksuvas, there's a whole parak about a wife taking nidarim and the implication of those nidarim on marriage. Okay, so now I have Ksuvas. Now we'll say based on the fact that nidarim is mentioned in Ksuvas, guess what? What's going to come after it? What's going to come after Ksuvas? Nidarim. Okay, so now I have V'hadr Tana. So I'll say then Labasa Ksuvas V'hadr Tana Nazir. Now why does nidarim come after Ksuvas? The midisamich lekra lindar neder Nazir. So we'll say so now. Because in the Torah, Nazirus is juxtaposed to Neder. Neder and Nazirus are mentioned in the same pasuk. So I've got Ksuvas, that starts me off in Seder Nashim. In Maseches Ksuvas, there's a parak about a woman making Nidarim. So I'm going to have Nidarim. In the Torah, Nazir is mentioned in the same context as Nidarim. Therefore, I'm going to have Maseches Nazir. That's the order for the Masechtas. The Midisamech Lekra, Lindor Neder Nazir, V'hadr Tana Sota. Now we'll say ultimately again we're going to have Sota. Now stop here and actually go back to the Gemara. So we'll say now watch this. So the Gemara says Kimatzva Ervastavar. So we'll say we're going to talk about this more. But Lamaisa, when the Torah speaks about divorce, the Torah understands that the primary motivation for divorce is immorality, or I should say, one of the primary reasons why a husband should consider dissolving the marriage is because of some type of immorality. Now, when it comes to morality, mi garam la'avera, they will say often what is at the root, often of marital indiscretion and immorality, yayin, alcohol, wine. Wine is in there. V'ka'amar kalaroa sota b'kilkula yazir atzma min hayayin. Whoever sees the sota, remember again, the sota is almost suspected of adultery. So whoever sees the sota in this degraded process, the best takeaway from sota ultimately is what? Don't drink any more wine. Right? Maybe at least for now. An immediate response is become a Nazir. So we'll say, so watch what's happened. Now, I just want to point out, in reality, based on this, when should Maseches Nazir occur? When should it occur in the Seder of Nashim? After Sota. So why is it before Sota? Remember again, it goes Nazir Sota. Sota is our next Masechta. Right? So why does it go Nazir Sota? So remember again, that's why? Because of the Pesukim in the Torah. Because ultimately, again, in the Torah, Nazirus is mentioned in the same pasuk as Nidarim. So therefore, after Maseches Nidarim, we're going to go to Nazir. But then after Nazir, we go to Sota because of the juxtaposition of taking a Nazirite vow in response to seeing a Sota. So also now you have your order for the beginning of Seder Nashim. Ksuvas. Seder Nashim starts out with Ksuvas because Ksuvas, again, contains so many of the halachos concerning marriage. There's a parak in Ksuvas about a wife taking Nidarim. Therefore, we go from Ksuvas to Nidarim. We then go from Nidarim to Nazir, because Nazir is mentioned in the same pasuk, and we go from Nazir to Sota, because the process of Nazirus is juxtaposed to Sota, because the response for seeing a Sota ultimately, again, is becoming a Nazir. So I'll just point out to you something beautiful on this Gemara. There is a magnificent idea by the Rebbe of Sakachav. And the Rebbe of Sakachav uses this lashon of Kol Haroa Sota B'Kilkula Yazir Atzmim Min Hayayin. So if you look at what's the lashon Kol Haroa, we'll say what's Kol Haroa? What's Kol Haroa? If you see it. So listen to this. The Rebbe says something amazing. He says, Lama Yaziru Atzmo. I don't understand. I see the sota, right? I see, right? Reuven is married to Rachel. Rachel is suspected of adultery. Reuven brings her to the base of Mikdash. She goes through this entire process of sota. I see the process. So what am I supposed to do? I should become a Nazir. Ask the Rebbe of Sakachav, why? What does that have to do with me? Why do I have to become a Nazir? Or why should I become a Nazir? Because of something I did. Right? It's not like I'm involved in this, right? This is not my problem. This is not my issue. So why am I obligated to have a response to this event? And the Rebbe of Sakachav says something amazing. He says, Kevan shehizmin Hashem yisbarach leneged einav asota b'kalkula ein ze ele kidei sheyilmod lahazir asvinayayin. But Rabbi Sakarchev says, if you see something in life that is not by accident, if you see something, Hashem wanted you to see it. And why did Hashem want you to see it? Because there's some message for you in this occurrence. I will say it is an absolutely incredible, overwhelming idea. There is nothing random in life. Nothing random in life. So we often think about this in an experiential sense. Whatever happens to me is hashgacha pratis. That is true. The Rabbi of Sakarchev takes it one step further. Whatever you see, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to see. You see nothing that the Ribbon Shalom doesn't want you to experience. So you see a sota b'kalkula. You see this maritally traumatic experience. You see this dissolution of marital fabric, of a marriage, of a relationship. You see that? HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted you to see that because there's a message that's involved in that. There's an incredible Maisa. Then we have to go on. Now you can't hold me back anymore. We're going to go on after this. There's an incredible Maisa with Rav Zusha of Anipoli. Great tzaddik, Rav Zusha of Anipoli. So the story is told about Rav Zusha that one time he was going ahead and traveling, and he was on the road, and some wagon driver got his wagon stuck in the mud. So he comes over to Rav Zusha, and he says, he's a Gentile guy, he says, can you help me get my wagon out of the mud? Rav Zusha said, I can't. The wagon driver said, no. You can, but you won't. And Rav Zusha stopped, and he said, sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts you just in one place, in one moment to learn one lesson. There's so much of life, it's not that I can't, but I won't. So we'll say another example of how even the most random of interactions and even the most seemingly random of occurrences, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to experience in order for me to learn something. So Reb Zusha needed to run into the wagon driver to understand, it's not that you can't, you can. You won't. You can. You just choose not to. Haroes sota b'kilkula, you see this sota, there's a reason that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to see this. There's a message. I will say, we have to live life with eyes wide open, recognizing that everything I see, everything I experience, everything I hear, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to have these experiences because there's something for me to learn, there's some lesson for me to absorb, there's some way for me to grow. Incredible. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, Shabbos say, here's the problem. Shabbos say, by the way, this is great because this is exactly what happened in Nidarim. Shabbos say the flow of the Mishnah is exactly what happened in Nidarim. Hey, the flow of the Mishnah doesn't work, right? Why? How does the Mishnah start? Kol kinuyim naziros kinaziros, right? Teaching us that what? Kinuyim work. Then the Mishnah launches into examples. But what are they examples of? Yados. This example say the same thing as the first Mishnah in Nidarim. Right? So again, you tell me kinuyim work, and then you go into examples of yados, and only after examples of yados do you do what? Loop back to the examples of kinuyim. What's going on over here? So pasach kinuyim farish yados amar rabba vitema kedi chisoy mechsera. Oh, best words, right? The Mishnah is missing, right? There's some deleted scenes, right? The Mishnah is missing some information. What are we missing? Vachi katani kol kinuyim naziros kinaziros the yados naziros kinaziros. Oh, it's missing a line. The Mishnah should have read all kinuyei naziros are like naziros, and yados are like naziros as well. So we'll say, so the flow of the Mishnah is how, right? Kinuyim work, yados work, examples of yados and examples of kinuyim. Beautiful. To which the Gemara says, ve'elu hein yados ha'omer hey harei Nazir. So the Gemara says, one second. V'lifrosh kinui bereisha. But I understand, why not follow the order? Let's remember again. Remember A, B, A, B, B, A. Remember this from the Dharam? So remember again, if we have a style in the Mishnah, so now we're saying, Mishnah teaches me like this, two halachas. Kinuyim work, yados work. A and B. So now when you give examples, why not follow the same model? Kinuyim work, yados work. Give me examples. So the way the Mishnah is structured is, kinuyim work, yados work. Then what does the Mishnah do? Gives me examples of yados, right? They're both saying again, Ehei, right? Ehei noah gives me examples of yados, and then only afterwards goes back and gives me examples of kinuyim. But why do that? If you tell me A and then B, give me examples of A and then B. Keep the order intact. To which the Gemara says, no. Because we'll say the style of the Mishnah over here is what we'll call an A-B-B-A model. Namely, the Mishnah will teach me A, then teach me B, then give me examples of B, and then examples of A. Since the last thing we spoke about was B, give me examples of the first item you just mentioned. So you talk about kinuyim, you talk about yados, give me examples of yados, and then give me examples of kinuyim. An A, B, B, A model. To which the Gemara says, and we have other examples. We have other examples of this. Kiddisnan, the both said this is literally what we learned in the beginning of the Dvar. It was incredible. Kiddisnan, both say Shabbos. What can you use for oil for Shabbos candles? What can't you use? Right. So what can I use? What can't I use? And what do the examples start with? The Mefarish, Ein Madlikin Bereisha. And I will say we begin with the list of things you can't use. So here it is. Right. A, B, and how do we do it? B, A. Right. Okay, fine. What can you insulate the pot with on Shabbos? What can't you insulate with a pot with? We begin with the discussion of what? What you can't use. What you can't use. What can woman go out with on Shabbos? What can't she go out with on Shabbos? And I will say, what do we begin with? We begin with the discussion of what she can't go out with. So we'll say, so what's the point? We've established a Mishnaic model. What's the Mishnaic model? The A, B, B, A model. Teach me A, teach me B, and then give the examples of B, and then the examples of A. And again, the logic behind that is, in other words, essentially continue the last stream of thought, right? Since you said, right, what can you use for oil, what can't you use for oil? Here are the things you can't use for oil. Then here are the things you can use for oil. So that seems to be the model of our Mishnah, right? There are kinuyim work, yados work, examples of yados, examples of kinuyim. I says there's only one problem. We find alternate models as well. We'll say what we call AB models. We find other models. For example, Vatinan, what can an animal go out with on Shabbos? And what can't an animal go out with on Shabbos? So we find other examples of this. Umefaresh, Yotze Gamal Beresha. So we'll say, and we find that what? The Mishnah will start with what the animals can go out with. So we'll say, this is an example of what? An AB model. So furthermore, yesh nochelin umanchilin, v'nochelin v'lo manchilin. Furthermore, another Mishnah, there are those people who inherit and bequeath, and those who inherit and don't bequeath, manchilin v'lo nochelin, or bequeath and don't inherit, lo nochelin v'lo manchilin. They don't inherit, they don't bequeath. Umefarish ve'elu nochelin umanchilin bereisha. And Rabbi say, so here is another AB model. We give examples of the first item, or the first principle espoused. So Rabbi say, so now here's our problem. So we're back to square one. So first of all, it's just interesting on a technical level, right? What's interesting about this? You're thinking to yourself, nothing. Nothing is interesting about this. Right? I'll say, so fine. I could read expressions, right? I'll say, so I'll tell you what is interesting about this is, first of all, I will say, it is always exciting to review something you've learned before, right? Especially when it's generally fresh. But what is interesting about a concept like this is that it teaches you, it's good to gain insight into the structure and the style of Mishnayos. So now what I come out with is, there are two stylistic structures to Mishnayos. There are A, B, Mishnayos, and A, B, A, Mishnayos. And both are correct structures. So both say, the problem now is we're back to our original question, which is our Mishnah follows an A, B, A structure, right? So again, I've got, Mishnah tells me, kinuyim work, yados work, examples of yados, examples of kinuyim. So now my question just is, why does our Mishnah choose an A, B, A structure when it could have just as easily done what? An A, B structure. That's all. So just stylistically, is there a reason why sometimes the author of Mishnayos choose one way versus another? So we'll say, here we go. To which the Gemara says, yes. Rabbi say, second to last line of the daf. Rather, in reality, Mishnayos can be structured both ways. Structured both ways. So Elahasam, so we'll say, so why is it? So let's go back, for example, the Shabbos cases, right? The Shabbos cases, Abba Mamad Likin, Bamat Tomnin. Why are all of those cases phrased in an A-B-B-A model? So Elahasam di Isura di Nafshehu Mefarish Isura di Nafshe Beresha. So this is very interesting. In the Mishnayos and Shabbos, namely the first two, right? Bamemad Likin Ubamat Tomnin. I would say those are Mishnayos which represent halachos concerning personal prohibition. When it comes to Mishnayos concerning personal prohibition, we're always going to phrase the prohibition first, right? Why? Because since this has to do with my own isurim, my own conduct on Shabbos, Chazal wanted to be very careful to immediately go ahead and espouse the halachos that tell me what to do. So, for example, Bameh madlikin ubama ein madlikin. What could I use for oil for Shabbos candles or for Shabbos? For light on Shabbos, what can't I? Ein madlikin. First, we're going to tell you what you can't use because we're concerned that we don't want you to come to violate Shabbos. And therefore, we'll put the Isser first. What can you insulate the pots with? What can't you insulate the pots with? Ein tomin. We're going to tell you what you can't use. Why? Again, when it comes to personal Isser, Chazal are going to tell me immediately what I can't do in order that I'm careful not to transgress. Incredible. Elahasam disur denafsheu mefarish disur denafshei bereisha. We'll go ahead. The Mishnah will go ahead, and that's why it's going to be an A-B-B-A model. We're going to tell you about what you can't do immediately, since this has to do with your own personal Shmir Shabbos. Gabe behema disura ID. I'm sorry. Gabe behema the isura ID behemahu daasi mefarish bereisha. So we'll say when it comes to the animal, right? What can an animal go out without Shabbos? What can't an animal go out on Shabbos? So we'll say that's not really my Isser. That's not really my Isser, right? That, so to speak, is on the animal. So there, ultimately, again, Chazal phrased it ultimately on what's permitted at first. So we'll say this is actually interesting. So it sounds like whenever we're dealing with a matter of personal Isser, Chazal will always be careful to go ahead and outline the Isurim first. Because again, this is about my own personal prohibited status, or I should say, this is about my own potential violation of Isurim. Chazal will put that out first. When it comes to things that are not my personal Isser, ultimately Chazal may put out the permitted halachas first. So therefore, I will say, so now this is helping me understand why again, Bameh madlikin ubamet tomnin. What could I use for oil? What could I insulate with? Chazal first told me what I can't use, because wrong decisions or bad mistakes or mistakes in this situation ultimately result in my own commission of prohibited acts. So the Gemara says, Amud Beis, Gabi yesh nochlin, nami mefarish eker nachal berisha. So we'll say similarly again when it comes to inheritance. So we'll say, so remember again. So in all the inheritance cases, you're talking about. There are people, or there are situations where a person inherits and bequeaths, inherits, doesn't bequeaths, bequeaths and doesn't inherit, doesn't bequeath. So what do we begin with? We just begin with the paradigmatic example of inheritance, where a person is able to inherit from one person and bequeath to another person. Fine. Elahacha, so we'll say, this is all fine. So now, very interesting. I understand. So we'll say, here's what I have. Number one, I understand that there are two styles to Mishnayos. A, B, A, B. A, B, B, A, that I understand. I also understand that sometimes Chazal will say, right? Chazal will go ahead and express an Isser before an Heter. Specifically, when it comes to something that determines my personal behavior. What don't I know? Or what don't I still? I still don't understand the structure of our Mishnah. Ella, hacha, lifrosh kinui bereisha. So we'll say, so again, this is all fine. I still don't understand. Why doesn't our Mishnah follow a typical A-B-A-B model? That's all. The Mishnah started off by telling me kinuyim work for Nazirus. Then it told me yados work for Nazirus. Right? Then what does it do? It gives me examples of yados and then kinuyim. A-B-B-A. I understand that is a valid model, but why not follow what would just intuitively be a more, I should say, follow a more intuitive model of A-B-A-B. That's all I'm asking. To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Elahainu tam yados hoil va'asyilan midrasha chavivale. So I'll say this is incredible. Again, I will say this is, we had this all in Nidarim. Chazal, so I will say, so here's what's happening over here. The Mishnah tells me kinuyim work, tells me yados work. Then when the Mishnah wants to give examples, the Mishnah prefers to first give examples of yados and then give examples of kinuyim. Why? Because Rabbi say a kinui, as we're going to see, is explicit. Yados are learned out from a drasha. And Chazal always have a particular affinity towards those things which are learned out from a drasha. Why? Because learning something out from a drasha requires some level of intellectual prowess, right? It requires some level of effort. Chazal always like things that require effort over things that are a bit more obvious. Take a look at Rashi. So Rashi says, Elahacha lifrosh kinoi bereisha elahainu taima demifaresh yados bereisha. So why is it that the Mishnah chooses to give examples of yados first? The hoil va'asyan le midrasha kedarmina parakama dinedarim. So great back in nedarim. Nazir lahazir lasos kinuye naziros kinaziros v'yados naziros kinaziros. So I will say, so again, since yados are learned out from a drasha, we choose to use the examples of yados before the examples of kinuyim. So again, I just want to just answer what's happening over here. So right, the Mishnah is starting out with kinuyim for naziros work, yados for naziros work. Which examples does the Mishnah give first? Yados, and then kinuyim. So stylistically, this is an A Mishnah. Why? So we'll say what's interesting about this is the Gemara feels that there still has to be a reason for the structure. So even though now that there are two valid structures, there has to be a reason for the structure. So why is this an A model? Very simple. Chazal were eager to get into yados. Why are they eager to get into yados? Because at the end of the day, yados are learned out from a drasha. Chazal, right? It's Chazal's drasha. It's their drasha. Therefore, they have a particular affinity to it. Therefore, they begin with those examples first. Fine. But then ask the Gemara, v'liftach bahom bereisha. So I don't understand. Chazal, if you like yados more than you like kinuyim, I have a better idea. How should you start the Mishnah? Kol yados naziros kinaziros. Start out with yados. No problem. Fine, I get it. You like yados. Everybody. Who doesn't like yados? Let's be honest, right? So I'll say, so again, you like yados. Great. Start the Mishnah off with it. Start the Mishnah off with yados. Why? In other words, why start with kinuyim? Go to yados. You want to dive into the examples of yados before kinuyim. If you like yados so much, start with it. Start yados, kinuyim, examples of yados, examples of kinuyim, and then, by the way, you'll seem to follow a more classical A-B model. To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Tana ki maschil be'ikar karban. So I'll say it's very interesting. When Chazal were starting the Mishnah, I'll say, what they wanted to do is as follows. They wanted to begin with what is considered to be a more typical formulation. So I'll say, remember again, what's a kinui? Right? An equivalent term. Equivalent terms, I will say, are either foreign language terms or contrived or just made up terms by Chazal. When the Mishnah was starting, the Mishnah wanted to start with a more typical neder naziros. So after Harini, so I will say, right, so what's your typical neder naziros? Your typical Harini Nazir. If you're going just in order of things that resemble a more typical neder naziros, what comes after a Harini Nazir? What comes after that? A kinui, right? A kinui, right? Why a kinui? Because let's say if you think about it, nazik, nazia. In other words, the word at least is a little bit similar. A yad is just a partial declaration. A hey. That was what we're going to see in the next sugya. A hey can mean so many things. So when Chazal is structuring the Mishnah, they want to start with the terms that most resemble a typical neder naziros that would create a carbonic obligation. So that's the lashon over here. So Tana ki maschil be'ikar carbon. When the Tana begins, he wants to begin ultimately again with a formulation that most resembles a typical neder naziros, which would come with it or which would bring with it a carbonic obligation. Well, take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Tana ki maschil be'ikar carbon be'isha kigon bikinuye nazirus shin inyan lashon nazir. So remember again, a kinui, an equivalent term, ultimately again still sounds most like a typical neder nazirus. So therefore, I will say it's actually incredible. So watch what's happening over here. So actually, let's finish up the Gemara. But the Inyan Perushe, when it gives examples, what does it want to do? It wants to give examples of yados first. Why does it want to give examples of yados first? Why? Because again, yados are learned out from a drasha, and drashos are more near and dear to Chazal. So if you bring this all together, we now understand the structure of the Mishnah. Right? The Mishnah teaches me Kinui Nazirus works, Yados Nazirus works, examples of Yados, examples of Nazirus. Why? What's the style of the Mishnah? Style of the Mishnah? A, B, B, A. Why is this the style of the Mishnah? Because I will say, after the typical formulation Chazal like to use, or Chazal wanted to give an example of the item which most resembles a typical formulation. What most resembles typical formulation? Kinui. So therefore, we're going to have Kinuim first, and after Kinuim, Yados. But when it comes to examples, Chazal wanted to give examples of those things that are learned out from a drasha. Why? Because those things learned out from a drasha are nearer and dearer to Chazal's heart. Therefore, they gave first examples of Yados and then examples of Kinuyim. That was beautiful. So now we understand the structure of so two things we come away with. Number one, the structure of our Mishnah, an A, B, B, A model, and why that is the appropriate model for here. We want to start with Kinuyim, but when it comes to examples, we want to start with Yados. So it's an A, B, B, A model. So that now I understand the structure of our Mishnah. I also learned, I will say, that there's another form of Mishnah. What's the other form of Mishnah? The A, B model. So now I know in terms of Mishnayos. What else do I know? I also now understand the placement of Meseches Nazir in Seder Nashim. Why is it here? Because it needs to follow on the heels of Nidarim. The truth is, the real reason it's here is because of Meseches Sota. Right? Kala roa Sota b'kalkula, Yazir asamin hayayin. Sota obviously belongs in Nashim. Right? Nazir is the reaction ultimately to Sota. The only question, if that's the case, it really should follow Sota. Why is it before Sota? Because it is biblically linked to Nidarim. Nidarim follows Ksuvas, because a parak in Ksuvas is about Nidarim. So now I know why Nazir is here, and I also understand the structure of the first Mishnah. Beautiful. Let's go weiter. Ha'omer ehei harei Nazir. So we'll say now, remember again, the example in the Mishnah of the first yad was a partial person said, hey, I will be. So a guy says, I will be, suddenly he's a Nazir. The Gemara says, whoa. Dilma ehei b'tainis ka'amar. Maybe what the guy is saying is, I will be in a state of tightness. Maybe he's accepting upon himself a fast day, right? How do you know why are we jumping over here that he's accepting an Adin Nazir? I'm Rabbi Shmuel. No. What's the case? Kigon shahaya Nazir over the fun of. Oh, okay. So now this whole thing makes a bit more sense. So what's happening over here? You got Ruvain, right? Ruvain is standing on the street corner. What happens? Shimon the Nazir passes right by him, and what does Ruvain say? I will be. So now let's say we understand that statement in the context of Shimon the Nazir passing in front of Ruvain as what is Ruvain saying? I'll be what? I'll be a Nazir. So we'll say, what do you see from here? Lema kasav Shmuel yadayim she'inan mochichos lahavim yadayim. Now we'll say, you see from here something very interesting. That we'll say, what would be the status of a hay by itself? Nothing. So we'll say, what does that tell you? We had all these sugyas. Yadayim she'inan mochichos. So we'll say, what's that she'inan mochichos? Right? An inconclusive yad, right? An ambiguous yad, right? So we'll say, so you see from here that an ambiguous yad doesn't work, right? If you just say stam ehei, that's an ambiguous, undefined yad. You see from here that according to Shmuel would not work. According to Shmuel, the only reason ehei works, we'll say, is why? Because there's a Nazir passing right in front of the guy who says, hey, yadayim she'inan mochichos lahavin yadayim. So which the Gemara said, we'll say, by the way, if you remember, we had a, well, actually, we'll come back to that. So Amri, bisman shan Nazir over the fun of leka l'sapuki b'milsach risa. You're right, the truth is, because here's the issue. Let's say I'm standing on the corner, right? Let's keep it easy. I'm the guy standing on the corner. Ruvain the Nazir walks in front of me. And I say, hey. So in that case, I will say it's clear contextually what it is that I'm doing. I'm undertaking a Neder Naziros. Aval, Eina Nazir over the fun of. I will say, here's the problem. If I'm standing on the corner, there's no Nazir coming in front of me. And I say, hey, Dilma, hey, betainis ka'amar. ultimately, again, maybe I'm just coming to go ahead and say I'm undertaking a fast day. Gemara is agreeing. In other words, without the Nazir passing in front of me, there's no way to understand what the Ehei means. The passing Nazir gives context to my Yad. And without the passing Nazir, literally again, it is not clear what's going on over here. So we'll say this is very interesting. Maybe what's happening is like this. I'm standing on the corner, right? Reuven, the Nazir, passes by me. I say Ehei. Maybe I will say what I'm doing is like this. Maybe I'm saying, I hereby undertake to provide the karbanos for Reuven's Nazirus. In other words, he'll say, sometimes the best way to not have to do something is how? Sponsor it, right? Sponsor it, right? So again, there are buyout options. There are buyout options, right? I don't want to learn, no problem. I'll endow Daf Yomi, So again, so Lamaisa, maybe what's happening over here is something very interesting, which is that Lamaisa, maybe when I'm standing on the corner and Reuven passes by, and I see Reuven, I say, hey, maybe what I'm doing is taking upon myself the cost. I'm going to sponsor. I'm not becoming a Nazir. No way. I'm becoming a Nazir, but I am happy to sponsor Reuven's Naziros. I'm happy to sponsor Reuven's Naziros. Right? I will go ahead and pay for his karbanos. Well, so take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Right? Rashi says it's about 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, about 12 lines up from the bottom. Dilma, afilu kinazir over the front of amai havi nazir. Dilma lepocher on the karbanos of kamar. Vachi mashma eheyani bimkomo lahakriv karbanosov. Maybe at the end of the day, right, I will be in Reuven's place to offer up his karbanos. Right? That's what I'm going to do. I'll offer up his karbanos. To which the Gemara says, the kamar belibo. Now we'll say, what's the case? Watch this. It's fascinating. The case is where, we'll say, watch this. There's a lot of stuff happening over here. I'm standing on the corner. That's step 1. Step 2. What happens? Reuven the Nazir walks in front of me. Step 3. I say, hey, I will be. Simultaneous, step 3 is step 4. Simultaneous to step 3 is step 4. That in my heart, I say, what does a hey mean? I'm going to be a Nazir. So I will say, in this case, the yad, there's a verbal part to the yad. I'm articulating, I will be. And then there's like a cognitive part. What's the cognitive part? I'm going to be a Nazir. To which the Gemara says, Ihachi Maila Memra. So I will say, if that's the case, then what's the shiloh over here? In other words, what's the chiddush over here? So you're telling me again, I'm saying hey, right? The Nazir is passing right in front of me. In my heart, I'm accepting upon myself a neder nazirus. So obviously I'm a Nazir. Like what's the shaila? To which we'll say, this is so profound. Ma'al meimra, so ma'al detema, ba'inan piv v'libo shavim. They will say, you might have thought you need your heart and your mouth to be aligned. Take a look at Rashi. Ba'inan shei piv v'libo shavim. The ba'inan shei motzi b'svasav mashi harher b'libo. As we'll say, I might have thought that I need to articulate exactly what I'm thinking in my heart in order for the articulation to be correct. So I will say, so again, if I'm thinking in my heart I'm going to be a Nazir, the only way this becomes a binding promise is how? If I articulate that same thing. Saying a hey is not enough. In order for me to become a Nazir, what has to happen? I have to say what? A hey, Nazir. Kamash Malon, no. Kamash Malon will say that again. If you have this confluence of circumstances, right? We'll say, so again, what's happening over here? All of these factors have to be in place in order for this yad to work. So number 1, I have to be in the right place. Number 2, there has to be what? A Nazir walking in front of me. Number 3, I have to say at least a hey. And number 4, in my mind, I have to have the clarification ultimately that what does a hey mean? Ultimately, again, I'm going to be a Nazir. So both say, this is the case. And it makes sense. Because, right, when we read the Mishnah, and the Mishnah said, if you say a hey, you're a Nazir. What's going through our mind when we read that? What's going through my mind? What? A hey can mean anything. A hey can mean I'm going to be fasting. A hey can mean an existential statement. I am. All right, I'm philosophizing on the street corner, right? I am. And suddenly, again, a moment of philosophy cost me 30 days as a Nazir. No, Tzur says, no. A hey works. Number 1, when it has context. There's a Nazir there. Furthermore, again, my kavana is to become a Nazir. So this context of the Nazir, there's a partial declaration. Ultimately, again, there's cognition. I'm going to become a Nazir. All of that together works. So I would say, but what's the Chiddush? So what's the Chiddush? Even though my articulation does not explicitly mirror ultimately what I'm thinking, the Neder Nazirus takes effect. I will say, so profound. So what does the Gemara teach? I mean, sometimes there's a disalignment between what I do and how I feel. Right? The goal is always to bring those two things into alignment. What the Gemara calls piv v'libo shavin. The goal is to have my mouth and my heart in alignment. What I say, right? What I believe is really what I say. Just like what I believe is really what I do. But sometimes there's a disalignment between these things. And even where there's a disalignment, a person could still accomplish great things. The goal is to be in complete alignment. But even when there's disalignment, I can still accomplish great things. And Rabbi said this is indeed how the Rambam paskins as well. The case of a hay, the Rambam understands, is where, number one, I'm standing there, there is a Nazir there, a Nazir walking by. Number two, I make the partial declaration of a hay. And number three, I have in mind ultimately again to be a Nazir. All of those ingredients present, the Yad is effective to create an Neder Nazir. Shabbosai, Shkoyach. All right, Chevron Zoom, have a great day, everyone. Mazel tov on the first daf. Incredible, incredible.
Why do we need the Nazir pass in front of him? Even if he's passing in front of him, it's still not really enough without experience.
You need everything. Because this is because a hay is such a weak state